July 1st. 3 countries, 1 deadline, and your grocery bill is sitting right in the middle of it. It's David Harper. On July 1st, Canada, the United States, and Mexico are legally required to declare, in writing, whether they want to keep the trade agreement that governs roughly $1.7 trillion a year in trade between our 3 countries. This is not a story about politics. This is a story about whether your groceries, your medication, and your monthly budget get more expensive starting this summer. 75% of everything Canada sells to the world goes to one country, the United States. When that relationship gets uncertain, the effects do not stay in boardrooms. They eventually show up at the checkout counter. I am going to walk you through exactly what this July 1st deadline actually is, what the realistic outcomes are, and exactly what it could mean for a senior living on a fixed income without the political noise, just the facts that affect your wallet. Stay with me, especially if you are on CPP, OAS, or GIS, because by the end of this video, you will know exactly what to watch for and exactly what you can do to prepare, regardless of how the politics shake out. I want to be upfront about something important. This channel does not take political sides, and this video is not about whether any particular leader or party is handling these negotiations well or poorly. It is simply about understanding a real economic event accurately so you can make calm, informed decisions about your own household budget, regardless of your own political views. Before we get into it, if you are not subscribed yet, please do it now. This channel exists to translate big, complicated stories like this one into exactly what they mean for your own monthly budget, without the noise you find everywhere else. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell. It takes 3 seconds, and it means you hear how stories like this one actually affect you as they unfold. Let me explain exactly what is happening on July 1st, because the words involved sound complicated, but the underlying idea is simple. The trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is called CUSMA here in Canada and USMCA in the United States. It is the same agreement with 2 different names. This agreement came into effect in 2020, replacing the older NAFTA agreement, and it included a built-in requirement. Exactly 6 years later, on July 1st, 2026, all 3 countries must formally state in writing whether they want to renew it. This July 1st deadline does not mean the agreement suddenly ends that day. I want to be very clear about that, because some of what circulates online makes it sound far more dramatic than it actually is. If all 3 countries agree to extend it, the agreement continues for another 16 years, all the way until 2042, largely unchanged. If they do not fully agree, the agreement does not disappear either. It simply continues under its original term until 2036, but shifts into mandatory yearly check-ins, called annual reviews, which creates more ongoing uncertainty rather than a sudden cutoff. And only in the most extreme scenario, any single country formally withdrawing, which requires 6 months advance notice, would the agreement actually end early. Trade analysts widely consider this the least likely outcome because the economic cost to all 3 countries would be severe. To put the scale of this in perspective, this single agreement covers roughly $1.3 trillion in annual trade in goods and services between Canada and the United States alone, which gives you a sense of just how much is genuinely at stake for both economies. Major business and agricultural groups in both countries have consistently urged their governments to renew the agreement, which is one reason many trade experts view the more dramatic withdrawal threats as a negotiating tactic rather than a genuine plan. Now here is exactly why this matters beyond the world of trade negotiators and government buildings. According to Statistics Canada, roughly 16% of our entire national economy and 12% of all jobs in this country depend directly on producing goods that get exported to the United States. When trade uncertainty rises, businesses tend to slow down hiring and delay new investment, simply because they do not know what the rules will look like in a year. We have already seen this pattern over the past year, with weaker hiring and slower economic growth. The Bank of Canada itself has stated publicly that an unfavorable outcome to this review could weaken Canadian exports, reduce production and hiring, and put downward pressure on our overall economic growth. Here is the part that connects most directly to your daily life. Tariffs and supply chain disruptions tend to push up the price of imported goods, and a weaker Canadian dollar makes anything bought from the United States more expensive, including many groceries, parts, and household goods that cross the border multiple times before reaching a store shelf. For someone living on a fixed income, CPP, OAS, or GIS that does not suddenly grow just because prices rise, even a modest increase in everyday costs can meaningfully tighten a monthly budget that was already carefully planned. To be fair and balanced here, the Bank of Canada has also noted that softer demand during periods of economic uncertainty can dampen some prices at the same time costs rise elsewhere, which is why the overall inflation effect is genuinely mixed, not simply one-directional. It is also worth noting that some specific sectoral tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles have already been in place for over a year, separate from this particular July review, meaning some of this economic pressure is not new and has already been working its way through the system for some time. I also want to address a specific question some of you may be wondering about directly. Does this trade uncertainty put my actual CPP payment at risk? The short answer is no, not directly. Your monthly CPP payment is calculated based on your personal contribution history, and it is not tied to short-term trade negotiations or stock market movements. The CPP fund itself, managed by the CPP Investment Board, does hold investments across many countries and sectors, including some exposure to North American markets and trade-sensitive industries. But this fund is specifically built to be diversified across hundreds of billions of dollars in assets in many countries and industries, precisely so that no single trade dispute or political event can meaningfully threaten the payments owed to current retirees. The more realistic, indirect connection is simply the cost of living effect we just discussed. If trade uncertainty pushes prices higher, your fixed CPP, OAS, or GIS payment may simply not stretch as far as it did before, even though the payment amount itself remains secure. Now let me give you the most balanced, realistic picture of what trade analysts and major Canadian banks actually expect, rather than the most dramatic possible version. Canada has already formally notified the United States and Mexico that it wants the agreement renewed, and most major bank economists, including those at Scotiabank, consider a full breakdown of the agreement to be a low-probability event. The most likely outcome, according to most economic analysis, sits somewhere in the middle. The agreement is not cleanly renewed exactly as written. Certain sector-specific tariffs may remain in place for a while longer, and the three countries shift into a period of annual reviews rather than a single, final resolution. This means the most probable scenario is genuinely a slow, gradual story rather than a sudden shock on July 2nd. Negotiations are widely expected to continue past the deadline itself, with talks likely extending into the following months. This does not mean nothing worth watching is happening. It means you have time to prepare calmly rather than needing to react in a panic to a single date on the calendar. Historically, every previous renegotiation of this trade relationship, going back to the original 1989 Canada-US Free Trade Agreement through NAFTA and into this current agreement, has eventually produced a workable deal, even when the process along the way felt tense or uncertain. Let me give you a few practical, calm steps that make sense regardless of exactly how these negotiations turn out. Step 1. Review your current monthly budget now, while you have time, and identify which categories, particularly groceries and household goods, would have the most room to absorb a modest price increase if one occurs gradually over the coming months. Step 2. If you have not already, check whether you qualify for provincial or federal programs that reduce fixed costs, such as the GST credit, provincial drug benefit programs, or property tax deferral programs we have covered on this channel before, since these become more valuable if other costs rise. Step 3. Avoid making any large, irreversible financial decisions purely out of fear based on a single headline about this trade deadline. The realistic timeline for any major effect is months, not days. And step 4. If you want to follow this story as it develops, watch for official updates directly from Canada's Department of Global Affairs or Canada.ca, rather than relying on dramatic headlines designed primarily to generate clicks. None of these 4 steps require you to become a trade policy expert. They simply require staying calmly informed and giving yourself a small financial cushion while this story continues to unfold over the coming months. I want to end with this. July 1st is a genuinely important date for Canada's economic relationship with the United States, and it deserves to be understood clearly, not buried under either political noise or alarmist headlines. Your CPP, OAS, and GIS payments themselves remain secure, calculated by formulas that have nothing to do with this specific trade negotiation. The realistic concern is simply the slow cost of living effect that trade uncertainty can create over time. And that effect is something you can prepare for calmly. If you know a senior who has been hearing alarming headlines about this trade deadline without understanding the realistic picture, share this video with them directly. Calm, accurate information is worth far more than dramatic uncertainty. Big economic stories like this one can feel overwhelming, especially when headlines compete to sound as dramatic as possible. But the most useful thing any of us can do is simply separate the genuine facts from the noise and act on the facts alone. If this video helped you today, please subscribe. I will keep following this story as it develops and translating exactly what it means for your own monthly budget without the noise. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I will see you in the next one.